Boldwood presents The Trap, written by Evie Hunter and read by Julie Maisie. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. As the wedding planner of the moment, all the big days blurred into one for Callie Devereux, with the notable exception of the Blakely wedding, which was when her life changed forever. It was the day she met and fell heavily for Mike. Of course, that wasn't his real name. She knew that now, and it probably explained why she'd had trouble equating the exotic and sophisticated man she'd fallen for with such a pedestrian name. But then, hindsight can be bloody irritating. Callie closed her eyes, recalling the impressive figure he'd cut as he strode into the pre-wedding reception in his Savile Row suit, as though he owned the hotel it was being staged in. Fashionably late, Callie suspected, when she thought about it later, that his timing had been deliberate. Mike liked to make an entrance, to say nothing of an impression. Callie watched the other women at the wedding reception drinking in the sight of him like they'd never seen a handsome man in the last decade. She idly wondered who the lucky lady would be, instinctively knowing that he would score before the bride and groom took to the floor for the first dance. It hadn't occurred to her that she would be his choice. Chapter 1. No, not there! In a strident tone worthy of a sergeant major, the bride's mother's voice cut effectively through the activity of preparation. Callie, whose patience had already been worn gossamer thin by the impossible woman's equally impossible demands, winced. She closed her eyes and took a deep, calming breath, counted to 10, and reminded herself that she really needed, this commission. The pedestal has to be there, Marion, Callie said into the ensuing crystalline silence as she moved the floral display back into its assigned position, or it will block the cinematographer's view when the couple exchange their vows. A moment that must definitely be preserved, Jason, Callie's assistant, added with a saccharine smile. Marion Blakely sniffed and looked set to argue the point, just as she had argued over every minor detail with Callie throughout the interminable planning for a wedding that was costing a ridiculous amount of money. Callie breathed a sigh of relief when Jason's charm appeared to work its magic, and another battle of wills was averted. "Oh, of course, you're right, Jason," she said, turning her attention to the menus and tutting. No, this won't do at all. I specifically said that I wanted Scottish wild salmon, not some cheap substitute that's probably farmed and—" She bustled off with menu in hand, presumably to berate some hapless chef. Callie drew in another deep breath, reminded herself just how much she would benefit financially if everything went off without a hitch, which it would, if only Marion would stop interfering, and turned her attention to the next item on her to-do list. Why does she bother to employ us if she wants to manage everything herself? Jason asked sotto voce. Brides get a bad press, Callie replied, but trust me, they aren't the ones who make our lives difficult. She glanced at Marion's ramrod straight back and was convinced she could sense the antagonism radiating from the woman. Even by mother of the bride standards, this one was especially difficult, giving Callie instructions and then undermining them at every turn. The bride and her soon-to-be husband looked petrified of her, barely opened their mouths, and would likely have preferred to run off to the nearest registry office. Tomorrow will be the happiest day of her daughter's life. Jason, who enjoyed nothing more than a good gossip, remarked, but not because she's marrying that gorgeous hunk of manhood, he added, going all gooey-eyed. Anyway, Little Maddie would likely marry the Hunchback of Notre Dame if it got her out from under her thumb. Callie stifled a smile as she consulted the endless to-do list on her tablet. I dare say little Maddie has a healthy trust fund, so could be independent now if she wanted to be. I shall be hearing that strident voice in my nightmares for the rest of my days and will likely need therapy to get past it, Jason said, shuddering. Make yourself useful and check that the table plan is being adhered to before she finds fault with it. Jason sashayed off in his skinny white jeans, one of the few people of either sex who could pull the unforgiving look off, and fluttered his fingers at the handsome barman polishing glasses. Callie stood back to examine the bower decorated with trailing flowers, beneath which the couple would stand in this sumptuous ballroom to pledge themselves to one another for the rest of their lives. Or until one of them strayed, Callie thought cynically. There was a problem with the caterers, whose van had broken down on the motorway. The florist hadn't received Marian's email changing the design of the bridesmaids' bouquets at the 11th hour, and that created another almighty argument that Callie was required to arbitrate. You should apply to the United Nations, Jason said in her ear as he floated past, trailing ribbons destined for the top table, which Callie knew his talented fingers would weave into a glorious festoon with consummate ease. His artistic flair was one of the reasons why she had employed him. That, and his wicked sense of humour and unswerving loyalty in a profession that was known for its bitchiness and underhand tactics. With you mediating, the Middle East would be at peace within weeks. Callie barely had time to smile before her mobile buzzed, and she was immersed in yet more conciliatory negotiations with the beautician. The woman had had it up to the neck with Marian Blakely's unreasonable demands, and felt inclined to withdraw her services on the grounds that she did not, as she bluntly pointed out to Callie, need all this crap. Who did? Callie wondered, as she calmed the girl down, reminding her just how well she was being paid to endure the crap in question. A mantra that Callie was obliged to repeat to herself at regular intervals in her line of work. Ah, this must be the mysterious daddy, Jason said, as a tall, elegant man in his 50s, with a sweep of thick, greying hair and a sophisticated air, strode into the room. The trophy wife on his arm couldn't have been older than the bride, but was a good 20 years younger than his former wife, which explained a lot, Callie decided. Well, well, Jason muttered. If looks could kill, then Daddy Dearest would be 6 feet under by now. He just pulled up in a Lamborghini, by the way. Nothing like being ostentatious. But still, who am I to argue? If you've got it, flaunt it. That's what I always say. I almost feel sorry for Marian, Callie said, sensing the animosity coming off her in waves. It can't be easy for someone so aware of her appearance to be replaced by a much younger model. If you want to feel sorry for anyone, spare a thought for our mousy little bride. It's supposed to be her big day. But Mummy and Daddy are in danger of turning it into World War III. Mummy is. Daddy appears oblivious to Marian, which must infuriate her. No wonder she's spending so lavishly on this shindig. Her ex is footing the bill. Hit him where it hurts. Are we going to get this started? Marian demanded imperiously. Robert Blakely made a show out of kissing his young wife, escorted her to a prominent chair in the front row, and then offered his daughter his arm. Shall we show them how to make an entrance, darling? He asked. You know I'm not good at that sort of thing, Daddy. Don't worry about it, Buttercup. I am. The bride gave an uncertain smile and fell into line, just as she had likely been doing for her entire life. How did he make all that luscious loot for his ex to fritter away? Jason asked, as he and Callie stood to the side, watching proceedings. Property, I think. Exclusive pads for the rich and deserving. Callie replied, smiling. Jason had been brought up in care, never knew either of his parents, and had gone through some tough times. Precocious and fun for the most part, he understandably had a massive chip on his shoulder when it came to those who made money out of other people's misery. "Gin," Callie told Jason emphatically when the rehearsal came to an end, with the bride's mother mercifully concentrating the majority of her venom on her ex-husband. "I need a hot bath, scented candles, and gin, not necessarily in that order." "Sorry, darling, no can do, I have plans." "Well, then, go and have fun, and I'll make do with Jinx for company. At least he never disagrees with me." "He's a cat, darling, so don't assume that he likes you. He simply tolerates you because you feed him." "I'll see you bright and early tomorrow for the fun and games." "Wouldn't miss it." Jason grabbed his bag, blew Callie an exaggerated air kiss, and headed for the door. "Toodles." Shaking her head at her irrepressible assistant's style, Callie gathered up her belongings and headed for her aging Beetle, tucked in the corner of the car park, well away from the showy red Lamborghini that had been parked directly in front of the entrance to the hotel, blocking the steps. She drove home to her isolated cottage, buried deep in the countryside near Chichester. It had belonged to her grandmother and represented a safe haven from Callie's otherwise disjointed childhood. Small and in need of renovation, it might be, but Callie loved it just the way it was, and sometimes thought she could still sense her grandmother's calming presence in the minuscule rooms. Jinx, her ginger cat, he of questionable loyalty, wound his way round her legs and meowed pitifully the moment Callie walked through the door. "I haven't been gone for that long," she protested, scratching the cat behind his ears. "Anyone would think you haven't eaten for a week." Callie opened a can of cat food and decanted the contents into Jinx's bowl. He bent his head, gave the food a sniff, and deigned to delicately set about it. "Don't you dare prove Jason right," she demanded, smiling in spite of herself as she turned her mind to her own supper. She opened the fridge and was confronted with almost nothing other than out-of-date ham and half a mouldy lettuce. "Ah, well, beans on toast again," she said resignedly. Callie wasn't hungry anyway. She had been inundated with tempting morsels from the hotel's kitchen, and it would have been impolite to decline. Such organisations weren't beyond a little subtle bribery, aware that Callie could bring more business to their doors if they made a good impression. She really ought to say no to the offerings that came her way. She had gained weight and struggled to fit into any of the 3 outfits she kept to wear on wedding days. After this wedding, she would definitely exercise more self-control. Probably. She made her snack, consumed it without tasting it, and then stripped off in preparation of the bath she had promised herself. On the basis that gin didn't count on the calorie front, she emerged from the bath, wrapped in a toweling robe, and poured herself a healthy measure. Then she curled up with her glass and a bridal magazine. It was essential in her line of work to keep up with the latest trends, and evenings at home were the only time she found to do her research. She hadn't turned 2 pages before she heard the back door open. Jinx, who had condescended to curl up beside Callie and actually purr, lifted his head and sniffed the air. "It's only Maisie," Callie scolded, "not an axe murderer." "You're not an axe murderer, are you?" she asked, when her friend put her head round the door. "Jinx wants to know." "Not yet, but I very easily could be," Maisie replied cheerfully. "Is there any ice?" she asked, taking a glass from the cabinet. "Are there 7 days in the week?" "Sorry, silly question. Just a mo. I'll get myself some sustenance and then tell you my latest woes. Do you need a top-up?" Maisie chuckled, and Callie thrust her glass in her direction like a prize fighter going in for the kill. "Another silly question." With strong drinks in hands, the girls settled down for a good natter. Maisie and Callie had grown up together and knew one another's darkest secrets. When she looked back on her fractured childhood, Callie firmly believed that Maisie's indefatigable good nature had been the catalyst that saw her through the worst of her mother's neglect and her mostly absent father's squalid ways. Callie's grandmother and Maisie, between them, had been her salvation. Maisie and Callie had gone different ways once school was behind them and lost touch for a while. Maisie went off to university and, from the reports that found their way to Callie's ears, had partied her way through her course. Even so, only Maisie was surprised when she came away with a first in economics, without, as she freely admitted, putting in much work. Callie, on the other hand, was required to take paid employment. More by luck than judgment, a vacancy came up in a wedding boutique, and she fell into her present occupation when asked to assist the owner with the arrangements for a last-minute wedding. Callie reckoned, even then, that she could have made the affair far more spectacular, even on a limited budget, and set about proving it when the next opportunity came along. Ironically, with no qualifications other than a will to succeed, Callie had established herself and was well on the way, as Maisie put it, to becoming an entrepreneur. Maisie, with her sharp intellect and shiny degree, married a guy she'd met at uni and produced her first child 6 months after the ceremony. Now the mother of 2 boisterous children, she worked from home as a bookkeeper for local businesses, as well as keeping her lazy husband in the style to which he aspired to become accustomed. Dan hadn't held down any sort of job for more than 5 minutes in all the time the couple had been married. He had no sense of responsibility and needed, as far as Callie was concerned, a boot up the backside. Callie had to bite her tongue to prevent herself from telling Maisie that he was a waste of space. He was fabulously good-looking. She was convinced that he had affairs and that Maisie must know it. Close as they were, it wasn't a conversation that Callie felt she could instigate. "What's he done this time?" Callie asked, aware from Maisie's expression that she had come round to grouse about Dan's lack of ambition and to have a respite from her demanding kids. "Only got fired from the bookies," Maisie replied with an exaggerated sigh. "I mean, how is that even possible?" In Dan's case, Callie thought but did not say, very easy. "How hard can it be to take bets? God alone knows he's been placing them all his life. He ought to be a natural." "Why did they let him go?" Maisie took a big slug of gin and shrugged. "I didn't even bother to ask. He reckons it was too menial and that he's capable of more." "Perhaps he should decide what it is that he actually wants to do and focus on getting there," Callie suggested mildly, knowing better than to criticise Dan. Maisie could, and frequently did so, but anyone else who voiced a word against Maisie's Adonis had better watch their backs. It was the only subject upon which Callie and Maisie had ever disagreed. "Do you need help?" she asked, hoping Maisie would say no. Lending money to friends was the fastest way for the friendship in question to fracture, she knew, but she owed Maisie so much that she would make an exception in her case. She sighed, seeing her nest egg and future plans being blown in the bookies, from whose employ Dan had just been summarily ejected. "Thanks, but no, we'll manage. At least with him at home, he can look after the kids and I can concentrate on the backlog of work that's piling up." Except Callie knew his idea of caring for the kids was at best spasmodic. There always seemed to be good reasons why he couldn't have them when Maisie most needed him to. And when he did take charge, he let them get away with murder, never saying no to anything they wanted, which made him the favourite parent. He handed them back to Maisie when they were full of E-numbers and bouncing off the ceiling, leaving it to her to instill discipline and be despised because Daddy let them do it. And yet, Maisie stuck by him. If that was love, then Callie was glad that all her attempts at romance had failed. She was far better off on her own. She thought back to the grand romance she had entered into at the age of 18, naive and with stars in her eyes. She only found out that he was a serial cheat when he gave her an STD. Talk about coming back down to earth with a bump. Was it any wonder that she was so cynical when it came to abiding love? It all seemed pretty one-sided to her, which made her choice of profession that much harder to fathom. Then again, perhaps being hard-hearted when it came to love and romance was a necessary qualification for her line of work. "How are the little monsters?" Callie asked. "Noisy. Josh wants to start judo and Saffron is banging on about riding lessons. Why can't my kids have cheap hobbies?" "Are there such things? Swimming, camping, tennis lessons down the local leisure centre, falling out of trees, playing in the park." She ticked the possibilities off on her fingers. "Or make their own fun like we used to. We were never ferried anywhere or needed every second of our holidays micromanaged. Just as well in my case." True. It was Callie's turn to take a large slug of gin. It went down the wrong way, causing her to splutter. Maisie thumped her on the back until the coughing subsided. "Any new men on your horizon?" Maisie asked. Callie shook her head. "Only Jason." "God, he's a dream. Such a tragedy that he's not straight." "He wouldn't be nearly as good at his job if he was. He can handle my latest bride's mother from hell far better than me. She's putty in his hands." "Well, anyway, you should spread your net. Join a singles club or something. You're not getting any younger and—" "If you say my body clock's ticking, then I swear I'll throw my drink at you." Maisie chuckled. "No, you won't. It would be a terrible waste of gin." "Seriously though, Cal, you want children of your own, don't you?" Did she? "Not at any price," she said evasively. "It would mean getting married, or at least being in a serious relationship. And you know how I feel about that sort of thing." "Just 'cause you got burned once, babe." "More than once," Callie replied absently, thinking of her other failed attempts at happily ever after, all of which had ended in disaster, usually because the guy cheated on her. There must be something about her that signposted her gullibility, she'd always thought. Anyway, it had put her off men. There was no such thing as a happy marriage. She should know. They had another drink, while Callie told her friend all about the wedding she was currently working on. Unlike Callie, Maisie was a born romantic and sighed when Callie described the bride's dress. "Sounds divine," she said enviously. "So it should. It's a Vera Wang." "My one regret is not wafting down the aisle in white. Ours, as you know, was a quick registry office job, which isn't the same thing at all. Half my brides who spend so lavishly on their big day finish up divorced within 5 years. It's an established fact. That is so depressing. I hate dealing in reality, which is why I never watch the news. I don't need much of an excuse to turn to the gin at the best of times." Marion Blakely is getting her own back on her ex by having such an expensive bash, but the gesture's lost on him. He can afford it, and it probably salves his conscience to give his daughter all the works. I gather he walked out when she was 10 and barely sees her now. I reckon she's probably older than his trophy wife. Men can do that, and no one bats an eye. I mean, there's no such thing as an ugly rich man. But if the tables are turned, and a wealthy older woman takes up with a toy boy, the world struggles to cope with the drama. Callie yawned and put her empty glass aside. Maisie took the hint and scrambled to her feet. "I guess I've given him enough time to bait the monsters. Not that he actually has to bait them, but you know what I mean. He knows I'm pissed off because he lost his job, so he's being ultra helpful. I'm taking advantage while it lasts. As for you, get yourself off to bed. You need an early night so you look your best for the wedding tomorrow." Maisie leaned over to kiss Callie. Who knows? A guest might prove to be the man of your dreams. Callie laughed as she waved her friend off. I would have to dream about men for that to be possible, she replied. Chapter 2. Jack Carlisle felt his muscles protest when he swung the pickaxe and met with solid resistance that vibrated up his arms. Fuck! He muttered, dropping the axe in disgust. This was supposed to be a simple job. It is, Frank replied, laughing. You're getting soft is all. All that suit wearing and sucking up to investors has taken its toll. Odin, Jack's large, shaggy mongrel, lifted his nose from the interesting smell that had caught his attention and woofed his agreement, making both men smile. Jack shrugged, unwilling to admit that he privately agreed with his foreman. You're mistaking me for Logan. He's the clothes horse. There's no mistaking you two. Stand back and watch, son. You might learn something. Frank swung the pickaxe with similarly discouraging results. Remind me which of us is going soft? Yeah, well, you need to bawl Logan out for committing us to this shit without checking out the feasibility. Frank leaned on the pickaxe's handle, looking hot and uncomfortable. Who owns this site, anyway? I can't see us getting permission to build on it. We're wasting our time. That's more Logan's department than mine. He's the brains, I'm the brawn in our partnership, as well you know. We both play to our strengths, and let's face it, Logan could sell ice to Inuits. Just because he has a fancy degree in something obscure, it doesn't make him the better man. Come on, Frank. We've been together, the three of us, through thick and thin. Logan has his faults, just like the rest of us, but he's 100% committed to expanding our business opportunities. He's hungry and ambitious, which can't be a bad thing. That's as maybe, but I was happy with the way we were. I guess I'm just not cut out to be an entrepreneur. Even so, I won't apologise because I like to sleep at night without worrying about my investments. I understand why you didn't want to become a partner, and I respect you for that. I'm just glad that you agreed to stay with us. It wouldn't be the same without you. Don't go getting all soppy on me. You'll be wanting a group hug or some shit next. Jack laughed as he dropped a hand to absently tug at one of Odin's ears. You're safe from my dubious advances. Well, anyway, we won't get away with surveying this site with a pickaxe. We'll need to get the earth-moving equipment in on Monday. Just like you predicted. Yeah, but I remain to be convinced that it's worth it. There's no telling unless we go through the preliminaries. Jack slapped Frank's shoulder. Come on, it's hot already and it's Saturday. We'll knock off and I'll buy you a beer. That'll work. The two old friends moved towards Jack's truck, but before they could climb aboard, a Porsche 911 screeched to a halt in front of it. What's up, guys? Logan asked, getting out of his car but leaving the engine running. Finished already? What's with the whistle? Frank asked, eyeing Logan's silver-grey suit, crisp white shirt, and flamboyantly patterned crimson tie. Bit over the top for a site visit, ain't it? Robert Blakely's daughter's getting married today. Need to keep him on side. Our potential investor? Jack asked, seeking clarification. Logan could be surprisingly close-lipped about such things, perhaps because Jack seldom bothered to ask. He trusted Logan and wasn't interested in the details. He owns this crappy piece of land that we are going to turn into a gold mine, Logan replied, absolute certainty underlying his words. That was one of the reasons why Jack and Logan got along so well, Jack had always thought. Logan saw the bigger picture and wasn't afraid to chase the dream. He was much better at brown-nosing it with the high flyers than Jack, who was more at home with a pint of local ale than a flute of vintage champagne. What can I tell him about your findings? Will he want to talk business at his daughter's wedding? Frank asked, sounding surprised. Robert is always willing to talk business. He never wastes an opportunity. That's what I like about him, and why I'm bothering to go. He will be in a celebratory mood and off his guard. A great time to push his buttons. Yes, well, today might not be the day to tell him that we'll have to bring a digger in, Jack said. The ground is solid, and we can't dig down deep enough by hand. A look of annoyance filtered across Logan's features. Damn, are you sure? I promised him some feedback today. Frank squared up to Logan. Feel free to have a go yourself, if you remember how. We'll be happy to hold your coat. Use the minimum amount of machinery and try to keep it low profile, Logan said. Robert doesn't want word getting out that he's thinking of developing. It will bring all the environmental nutters out from the woodwork, and he can do without that sort of hassle. It might put him off the entire idea, and that will be a disaster. You'd best get going, Frank said. You don't want to miss the nuptials, or the opportunity to brown nose, he added, in an undertone that was deliberately audible. Jack sighed, worried that something would have to give between Frank and Logan before the antagonism impacted upon the bottom line. Locking them in a room and leaving them to slug it out sprang to mind. This business needed them both, and they couldn't carry on at one another's throats indefinitely. Logan pretended not to notice Frank's growing aggression. He was good at ignoring anything he didn't want to confront. But even so... Catch you later, Logan said, climbing back into his car and tearing off with a squeal of tyres, leaving a plume of exhaust fumes in his wake. Frank and Jack got into Jack's truck, with Odin taking up the entire back seat with his rangy body sprawled across it. He drove them the short distance to their local in silence. Why'd you let him do it? Frank asked, once they had pints in front of them and occupied bar stools where they could keep one eye on the football match being shown on the big TV screen that every pub seemed to find essential nowadays. Do what? Jack asked, taking a healthy swig of beer and placing his glass in the centre of a drip mat. Logan talks down to us both, but never gets his own hands dirty. As the kids would say, he's disrespecting you. Nah. Logan and I go way back, as well you know. Like I say, we play to our strengths. But you're equal partners in the business. You don't take orders from him. Logan has his demons, just like the rest of us. But he's basically good people. I wouldn't know how to start looking for backers, whereas Logan can smell them at 20 paces with the wind in the wrong direction. I hear you, but there's something not right about this latest fiasco. Frank put his glass down and scratched his ear. Bullshit is something I can smell, very distinctly. And right now, Logan's dealing it out to us like we were prize chumps. It's something to do with this latest site. I can sense it. Wish I knew what it was. Jack smiled at the barmaid when she came to check they had everything they needed for the third time, then placed a bowl of water on the floor for Odin. You're in there, mate, Frank said, chuckling when the girl walked away, swaying her hips provocatively. Don't know what there is to like about an ugly bastard like you, but from what I've seen, you can take your pick. It don't seem right. Jack laughed. You can't have too much of a good thing. Wouldn't know myself. My missus would knock me into the middle of next week if I even thought about straying. Logan can be brash, I'll grant you, Jack said, returning to their earlier conversation. But that's because he was brought up in a different world to ours. Frank sniffed, unimpressed. His family have a few bob and live in a mansion. So what? His shit still stinks just like the rest of us. I saw it all, remember? Because your mother cleaned for his family and you got to play with the son and heir. Frank's expression made it clear what he thought of the demarcation lines. Logan's pa ain't quite so wealthy now. The family estate, Logan's inheritance, is long gone, and he's grown up with a driving ambition to turn things around, to impress his old man, if you like. An old man who's gaga and shut away in a home? Frank supped his ale and screwed up his features. Welcome to the real world, Logan. Well, real by his standards. The first thing he did when his old man lost all his investments was to marry an heiress. That's not exactly making his own way, is it? It's a matter of degree. Logan's privileged world fell apart, but he's pulled himself up by his bootlaces. More like his senna wingtips, Frank said in a sneering tone. He'll tell you that you have to look the part if you want to be taken seriously. Well, he'd know more about that than I do. And I'd be the first to accept that he does bring in the business. Frank scratched his chin. It's just that I worry that he's getting over-ambitious, to say nothing of secretive. Is that why you decided against investing as a partner? I guess. Well, partly. My missus was dead set against it. She reckons we need our savings to help the kids and can't afford to risk losing the lot. She's right and all. You've never really taken to Logan. I've never understood why. Frank gave a wry smile over the rim of his glass. You want to know why? OK, I'll tell you. But he paused to take a long sup of ale before doing so. I really liked Sally Faulkner, and in our senior year, she agreed to go out with me. I was well made up, I don't mind telling you. Then you introduced Logan into our circle, and he took her from me simply because he could. He walked on water as far as all the girls were concerned. You both did. Us lesser mortals had to fight over your leftovers. That's why Sally agreeing to go out with me meant so much. Anyway, Logan had his way with her and then dumped her, at which point she came crawling back to me, wanting to lick her wounds and expecting me to welcome her with open arms. I didn't know, Jack said. I'm sorry. Logan's my best mate, but I'm not blind to his faults, and I can well believe he'd do something that spiteful. Yeah, well, it's water under the bridge now. I met Yvonne the following year, kept her well away from Logan, and have never regretted marrying her. Jack nodded. He'd never taken the matrimonial plunge himself, but sometimes envied Frank his chaotic yet harmonious family life. Odin's company was all well and good, but sometimes it wasn't enough for him. But the fact of the matter was that Jack, although he'd dated more than his share of attractive women, simply hadn't met anyone he'd be willing to spend the rest of his life with. You beat him hands down eventually, Jack said. You have a wife you love, some well-adjusted kids and a happy home life. Logan lives in a show house, not a home. He doesn't love his wife, still screws anything with a pulse and barely knows his kids' names. Frank cocked a brow. That's normal behaviour, is it? Define normal. My point is, material wealth doesn't bring happiness, but it sure as hell helps. Both men laughed as they drained their glasses and stood to leave. As he drove home, with Odin riding shotgun, Jack reflected upon Frank's rant against Logan, mentally springing to his friend's defence, just like always, even though recently an element of unease had trickled into his mind with regard to Logan's behaviour. Was there a grain of truth in what Frank had said about Logan being over-ambitious, or did he still bear a grudge following Logan's unreasonable behaviour all those years before? What do you reckon, Odin? He asked. Should I be reining Logan in? No point asking you, I suppose, because the two of you have never got along. Logan's scared of you, even if you are a big softy. Odin woofed, making Jack smile and increasing his conviction that Odin understood every word he said. Come on then, mate, he said, pulling into the driveway of his modest semi and cutting the engine. Let's find you something to eat. Callie was up with the dawn, but struggled to pull the zip up on her favourite wedding outfit, the one that ordinarily forgave the odd added pound or two. It seemed that there was a limit to its tolerant nature. Damn it, she muttered, breathing in and holding her breath until the zip reluctantly slipped into place. I am definitely on a diet from Monday. She arrived at the hotel with Jason, bleary-eyed, hot on her heels. How was the date? She asked. Phenomenal, he replied, closing his eyes for an expressive moment. I think I am in lust. Callie smiled, glad that one of them was getting laid. Again? Hey, we're not all as selective as you are. Okay, Let's quickly gloss over my lack of a life and get this show on the road. She consulted her agenda, divided up the tasks that remained, and they beavered away in efficient harmony for over an hour. It's so much easier without Marion getting in the way, Jason said, standing back and admiring the floral displays. It's going like clockwork. Don't jinx it, Callie said. But she smiled, equally pleased with the way that the ballroom looked. Not even Marion will be able to find fault. Jason shuddered. Now who's jinxing it? Callie offered up a wry grin. Good point. Now, let's do one final check. The registrar arrived shortly after that, and before Callie could draw breath, the first of the guests filtered in. They were directed to their allocated seats by the ushers whom Marion had insisted upon. All the trimmings of a church wedding in a hotel ballroom, as was so often the case nowadays. Callie and Jason stood unobtrusively at the back of the room, close to the point where the French doors were thrown open to a terrace and the manicured grounds beyond. The sun had even emerged from behind a bank of cloud. Well, of course it had. The elements wouldn't dare to rain on Marion's parade, Jason muttered, echoing Callie's thoughts. They both knew this was not the bride's day. Both slightly on edge, Callie and Jason waited, ready to swoop on the dozen or more disasters that could and inevitably did strike at the 11th hour. It's getting close to showtime, Jason muttered, tapping the fingers of one hand edgily against his thigh. Callie blinked. When one of the most handsome men she had ever seen strode across the lawns and swept into the room as though he owned it. The damned car park was full, he told Callie, as though she deserved an explanation. Had to hoof it from across the road. Bad luck, Jason said, batting his outrageously long lashes at the man. Making an entrance as usual, I see, one of the ushers said in a loud voice, pumping the man's hand and conducting him to a seat close to the front. Callie noticed the appreciative glances that he gathered carelessly in his wake as he strolled down the makeshift aisle, nodding to acquaintances as he went. Will you look at that? Jason was practically panting. Who is he? I thought you were spoken for, she paused, again. Darling, I'm too young to tie myself down to one man. Callie rolled her eyes. A business connection of the bride's father, I think. Callie watched the commotion caused by the man's arrival as he took his time settling in his seat, almost as though he wanted to be sure that he'd been noticed. She fought the urge to assure him that he had nothing to concern himself about in that respect. Not a single person of either sex had missed his entry. He was an outrageously handsome man, comfortable with who he was, Callie reckoned, and one who was accustomed to creating a stir wherever he went, enjoying the accolades. At 6 foot or thereabouts, he wore a sophisticated air with the ease of a man born into a privileged position. His dirty blonde hair was clipped short at the sides, and his perfectly aligned features were almost too, well, perfect. They were enhanced by piercing blue eyes and a lazy smile that made its recipient feel as though she was the chosen one. Callie knew, because he'd given her a long look when he walked into the room, and now glanced over his shoulder at her, almost as though he sensed her intense interest in him. Annoyed to have been caught gawping in such an unprofessional manner, Callie's cheeks burned as she hastily returned her attention to her lists. Marion swept in, wearing an apricot creation that floated around her slim figure like a shroud. The handsome hunk glanced at her, dipped his head as she passed his position, and then again glanced over his shoulder at Callie, a hint of amusement in his expression, as though sensing Callie's impatience with the woman's pretensions. Get a grip, she muttered. Pretty faces of either sex did not influence her as a general rule, especially men she met during the course of her working life. She accepted, that she had lousy taste when it came to the opposite sex and had decided they were not worth the effort. Callie had a plan, was determined to succeed, and that plan left no room for distractions, emotional or otherwise. Besides, she had a dismal track record with men, had wrapped her heart in a protective cocoon of ambition and would never allow it to be dented ever again. The bride entered to a fanfare of Wagner and gasps of appreciation for the guests when they caught sight of Maddie's tastefully restrained gown. Callie often wondered at the wisdom of brides who insisted upon a strapless gown and then spent the rest of their special day worrying about it staying up. She noticed the chief bridesmaid, a remarkably pretty girl, glance at the hunk in the silver-grey suit. She almost collided with Maddie because she was so slow to look away again and hadn't realised that the bride had reached the flowered bower that acted as a modern-day altar. Callie breathed a little more easily as the ceremony went off without a hitch. "Let the fun begin," Jason murmured as the guests mingled, taking champagne from the trays of the waiting staff who circulated whilst an endless stream of photographs were taken and videos filmed. Callie slipped away and entered the kitchens, which were in a state of organised chaos. 2 more hours and her duty would be done. Her feet ached in her 4-inch heels, and she thought longingly of her squishy sofa, her PJs, and a large, well-earned glass of wine. Logan stifled a yawn as he greeted acquaintances and distributed charm and light banter with an even hand. He didn't consider himself to be a vain man, particularly, but enjoyed being admired and creating a stir. He was careful, in situations such as this one, not to flirt with the wives, almost all of whom came onto him with decreasing degrees of restraint as the wine flowed. The chief bridesmaid was a case in point. She was recently married herself, so he'd been told, to one of the ushers, a man built like a rugby fullback. But it hadn't prevented her from giving him the look throughout the entire ceremony. A yawn threatened to escape when he thought how easy it all was nowadays. There was no thrill of the chase anymore, success a foregone conclusion. Not that he was on the prowl for an easy conquest today, he reminded himself. He and Blakely were on the point of going into business together, as he had pointed out to Jack earlier, and it was down to Logan, as always, to make it happen. A couple of female guests had attached themselves to him, and he listened to their chatter with half an ear, all the while glancing around the room, looking for opportunities. Blakely wasn't the only influential man in attendance, and this was a perfect chance to make a good impression. Investors were thin on the ground in this day and age, more cautious than they had once been, but still subconsciously willing to be won over. "That's Callie Devereux," one of the female guests told him, when his glance fell upon the slightly overweight woman he'd noticed when he made his entrance. Dressed in cream and turquoise that fell just below her knee and left a tantalising expanse of shapely leg on display, it also glanced over a stomach that wasn't flat, but showcased impressive curves.